kind of scamp, as a variant on the pious mask of Pecksniff or the candid mask of Bagstock. He may never once have had the unfriendly thought, "Suppose Hunt behaved like a rascal." He may have only had the fanciful thought, "Suppose a rascal behaved like Hunt." But there is good reason for mentioning Skimpole, especially in the character of Skimpole. Dickens displayed again a quality that was very admirable in him. I mean a disposition to see things sanely and to satirize even his own faults. He was commonly occupied in satirizing the Gradgrinds, the economists, the men of smiles and self-help. For him there was nothing poorer than their wealth, nothing more selfish than their self-denial, and against them he was in the habit of pitting the people of a more expansive habit, the happy swivellers and the Micawbers, who, if they were poor, were at least as rich as their last penny could make them. He loved that great Christian carelessness that seeks its meat from God. It was merely a kind of uncontrollable honesty that forced him into urging the other side. He could not disguise from himself or from the world that man who began by seeking his meat from his neighbour without apprising his neighbour of the fact. He had shown how good irresponsibility could be; he could not stoop to hide how bad it could be. He created Skimpole, and Skimpole is the dark underside of Micawber. In attempting Skimpole he attempted something with great and urgent meaning. He attempted it, I say. I do not assert that he carried it through. As has been remarked, he was never successful in describing psychological change. His characters are the same yesterday, today, and forever, and critics have complained very justly of the crude villainy of Skimpole's action in the matter of Joe and Mr. Bucket. Certainly Skimpole had no need to commit a clumsy treachery to win a clumsy bribe. He had only to call on Mr. Jarndyce. He had lost his honour too long to need to sell it. The effect is bad, but I repeat that the aim was great. Dickens wished, under the symbol of Skimpole, to point out a truth, which is, perhaps, the most terrible in moral psychology. I mean the fact that it is by no means easy to draw the line between light and heavy offence. He desired to show that there are no faults, however kindly, that we can afford to flatter or to let alone. He meant that perhaps Skimpole had once been as good a man as Swiveller. If flattered or let alone, our kindliest fault can destroy our kindliest virtue. A thing may begin as very human weakness and end as very inhuman weakness. Skimpole means that the extremes of evil are much nearer than we think. A man may begin by being too generous to pay his debts, and end by being too mean to pay his debts. For the vices are very strangely in league, and encourage each other. A sober man may become a drunkard through being a coward. A brave man may become a coward through being a drunkard. That is the thing Dickens was darkly trying to convey in Skimpole. That a man might become a mountain of selfishness if he attended only to the Dickens virtues. There is nothing that can be neglected. There is no such thing, he meant, as a peccadillo. I have dwelt on this consciousness of his because, alas, it had a very sharp edge for himself. Even while he was permitting a fault originally small to make a comedy of Skimpole, a fault originally small was making a tragedy of Charles Dickens. For Dickens also had a bad quality, not intrinsically very terrible, which he allowed to wreck his life. He also had a small weakness that could sometimes become stronger than all his strengths. His selfishness was not, it need hardly be said, the selfishness of Gradgrind. He was particularly compassionate and liberal, nor was it in the least the selfishness of Skimpole. He was entirely self-dependent, industrious, and dignified. His selfishness was wholly a selfishness of the nerves. Whatever his whim or the temperature of the instant told him to do must be done. He was the type of man who would break a window if it would not open or give him air. And this weakness of his had, by the time of which we speak, led to a breach between himself and his wife which he was too exasperated and excited to heal in time. Everything must be put right, and put right at once with him. If London bored him, he must go to the Continent at once. If the Continent bored him, he must come back to London at once. If the day was too noisy, the whole household must be quiet. If night was too quiet, the whole household must wake up. Above all, he had the supreme character of the domestic despot, that his good temper was, if possible, more despotic than his bad temper. When he was miserable, as he often was, poor fellow, they only had to listen to his railings. When he was happy, they had to listen to his novels. All this, which was mainly mere excitability, did not seem to amount to much. It did not in the least mean that he had ceased to be a clean living and kind-hearted and quite honest man. But there was this evil about it, that he did not resist his little weakness at all. He pampered it as Skimpole pampered his, and it separated him and his wife. A mere silly trick of temperament did everything that the blackest misconduct could have done. A random sensibility, started about the shuffling of papers or the shutting of a window, ended by tearing two clean Christian people from each other, like a blast of bigamy or adultery. End of chapter 8. The transition